Hi, this is Ms. Heidi from Olympian High School. We're going to use the Traditions and Encounters textbook to look at chapter 36. We're going to focus on Asian paths to autonomy to start. First thing, you need to know that Asia doesn't just include China and Japan. I'm sure you guys have studied geography, but we need to know that Asia is a big place, and we don't want to forget about South Asia. One of the biggest places on South Asia is India. So I'm even Asian, right? Being Arab from Iraq and Kuwait, that's Southwest Asian, which is normally called Middle Eastern. But we just need to, as American students, I think tend to pigeonhole all, like Asia is just being China and Japan. But you always need to remember that South Asia, India, is a part of Asia. And that's where we're going to look. We're going to start with India's quest for home rule. So I'm going to go back and forth between the PowerPoint and the chapter. I'm going to try to go really fast. First thing, you need to know what's contributing to a rise in nationalist consciousness or awareness of belonging to a nation. One of those things is the railroads. The railroads you'll see depicted in a movie called Gandhi that you can watch for extra credit for my class and possibly for Mr. Hammond's as well. But that's contributing to people feeling connected to each other and being within easy reach of one another, as the book says. You also have the promotion of Enlightenment types of ideas by the fact that some Indians that are part of the high up like civil service that the British built in India to help administer over their colony, they've been educated in Europe and exposed to ideas like democracy, freedom, and equality, which help promote nationalist sentiment. Two institutions that are also going to help promote Indian nationalism are the Indian National Congress, which was created way back in 1885. And that institution is going to evolve and change, especially under the leadership of Gandhi, who transforms it from an anglicized, more British representing white, sort of washed institution to one that more fully represents the diversity of India. And it inspires people. And it's also going to be a little bit more aggressively fighting for independence after World War I. So there's a shift, there's a turning point. Before World War I, they're supportive of the British, especially in terms of the war, World War I. And then afterwards, they're going to be in opposition of the British. You also have another organization called the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who starts it in 1906. This institution is concerned about the fact that there are more Hindus than there are Muslims in India. And they're really worried that if they ever do achieve independence, they might be exploited by the Hindus. And to some degree, that was a valid concern because during the Great Depression, most of the landlords were Hindus and the tenants were Muslims and they were exploited. And it was difficult for them to pay their rents. And so there's tension and fear that makes national unification difficult. You want to think of the Great War as being a big change, a turning point, partly because of the way that people were exposed to new ideas as well. You have ideas emanating out of Washington, D.C., so Woodrow Wilson from America and his 14 points, the idea of self-determination, and then St. Petersburg here representing communism. So you have nationalist ideas and communist ideas. So people are listening to this and studying it and being inspired to seek independence and potentially try to organize a state along either nationalist or communist lines. Your book does a great job talking to you about Mohandas Gandhi. You can learn all about him in the movie as well. You can learn about how he was wed when he was young, 13. He himself was Hindu, but he studied many other religions. He practiced something called ahimsa, which is nonviolence. It's really important because it's going to have a profound effect on other nonviolent protest movements, like the one carried out by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States of America in the 1960s for Black rights. It is actually a Jain concept. It's a different religion, rooted in a different religion called Jainism, all about nonviolence. You can study in the book about that. He also believed in satyagraha, truth and firmness. Basically, he believed in something called passive resistance, but many people challenge the way this is, like, it's not exactly passive. It's very effective, very efficient. Anyway, you'll read more about him. He originally was a lawyer. He first went to go study law in London because that was part of the British Empire. And then he went to South Africa because that was part of the British Empire. And there he worked very hard to transform the roles of Indians who in South Africa were called blacks and were treated really poorly, as the blacks were as well. And so he made a name for himself in South Africa fighting for Indian rights. And when he eventually went back to India, he became this champion, and that people, very respected people, knew him. And that's when he's going to transform the Indian National Congress into a more representative institution and body. People loved him. They started to call him the Mahatma, the great soul. He himself was a part of the merchant caste, but he didn't believe in the caste system of India, which often discriminated against people who were of the lower caste or the casteless, the untouchables, which he renamed Parijans, children of God. Under his leadership, you see the Indian National Congress enacting two mass demonstrations or mass movements, the non-cooperation movement of 1920, 1922, and the civil disobedience movement of 1930. Gandhi was more or less against industrialization. He called for a boycott of British goods. He wanted a resurgence of the cottage industries. The British government did not like these demonstrations, even though they were nonviolent, and they often retaliated with violence. Sometimes there's obviously violence on both sides when these protest movements happen. Sometimes they turn violent. One of the most outrageous acts of violence by the British government against nonviolent protesters was at a place called Amritsar that is depicted in the movie Gandhi that I asked you to potentially watch, where basically the British government shot at a crowd of unarmed people, killing over 300 demonstrators, unarmed demonstrators. Eventually, the British government realizes that they can't continue to repress nationalism, and they start to pass laws to give India the self-governing institutions it needs to eventually become independent. One of those laws is called the India Act, the Government of India Act. Unfortunately, there were some obstacles to trying to create one state in India. There's a few. One is the fact that there were many princes that did not want to cooperate with this new type of governing structure and institution. Another obstacle is the fear between Muslims and Hindus. There's tension between them, and a fear by the Muslims that they would be exploited, as I told you from their experience during the Great Depression. I mentioned that the leader of the Muslim League was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He called for the creation of two states, one called India for the Hindus and one called Pakistan, or the land of the pure, for the Muslims. The problem is that Muslims don't neatly live in one area and Hindus don't live neatly in one area. So this is going to cause a lot of drama, a lot of migration, a lot of violence as this eventually unfolds and leads to the creation of two states. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're just talking about the rise of nationalism and people exploring communism and looking for a way to get rid of the imperialists, the British.